All right, let's see if we can tie this all together. So our dilemma at the end of the last video, our big cliffhanger was, how do I get, so I want to come in here and start printing out rows for let's see, where am I? Table body. So in here, I want to start printing out in a new table row. I want to print columns that go out and get the first record in the database, the first piece of information. So the first event name, and then the vendor name, and then the food rating, and I want to print that out. Now the way we'd done it in .NET was to say model dot event name, and we'd put the @ symbol in front of it, and that would make it work. All right, so that's how we typically would do that in .NET, right? Well, we don't have that ability now. We don't have the ASP4. We don't have that model binding that we had before, and so that's not going to work for us. So how do we do it? Well, interestingly enough, there is a similar way of doing it in React that's going to be helpful for us. And so in my, let's see where I'm going to put it. So in the source folder itself, let's create a new folder called types. Now, it doesn't need to be called types. I don't think. It can be called something else, but this is the way we typically see it. And so in there, we're going to build React's version of a model. And so I'm going to come in and say new file, and I'm going to call this one our, and to make it clear, I'm going to say one food, what do I want to call it? Let's call it, one food item, just to make it as clear as possible. First of all, I don't want it to just be called food. Well, no, I think we want to call it the same name as the one we did on the other side. Now I can't remember. So I think, let's just to be safe, let's call it Marriott food, which was what we called it on the data side over here. We called it a Marriott food object. So I'm going to name it the same thing over here. So Marriott food, but then the name of it needs to be marriottfood.ts, which is a TypeScript file. But here's where we're going to define the type of a Marriott food. So we say export type Marriott food equals opening brace, and then we'll have a closing brace at the end of that. And here's where we're going to define what we have. So the interesting part is that these names need to match exactly the names in our model. Okay? Now we do it in a different format because there's a different naming convention. C# uses uppercase letters, where React will use lowercase letters for these items, but as long as they're the same name. So we say food ID was one of them, and what type of information is that going to be? That's a number. Okay, so we've got that information. Let's go to the next one. So next we had event name. So I'm going to name this event name, and that's going to be a string. By the way, this took me a little while to figure out that it needed to be the same names. So I'm saving you hopefully a little bit of trouble here. Vendor name. It's amazing how long it takes to figure this stuff out. And the fact that it didn't need to be exactly the same case and everything like that. And then we have food name, and that is going to be an int, or a number. Okay, so we've got these 4 pieces of information that belong to this TS file. So I've created this TS file. And so now, as we go back to our food list and we start to try and bind this in, we're going to need to get that object. So I'm going to come out here and say import. And what I want to import is a Marriott food object. And then it says, do you want to use this path? Do you want to go up to the root, go down to types, and get Marriott food? And the answer is yes, that's exactly what I want to do. And of course, it's going to yell at me because I'm not using it anywhere. But that's okay, I will. We're going to do that next. So now that I have this TS file kind of bound, well, it's not bound in yet, but it's being used here in this food list, then I can start to put everything together in terms of our what's the word? Our state and our hooks. And so I say const here, and then I give it a name, and I can call it whatever I want to. We can say, again, food data or something, food data, and then we want to be able to give the ability to set the food data. And we're going to set its initial, where we're going to use state. So we say use state first, and then we're going to set its initial state. Now it's not going to recognize use state at first, and so this is where, if you'll recall, we say quick fix. Do we want to import use state from React? And we do. So we bring in the use state. Now the difference here is we're going to say that the use state in angle brackets, we want to use a Marriott food type. Okay, and we want to take that type and make it into an array of Marriott food. So this is like saying a DB set of Marriott food. I'm creating an array here of Marriott food. That's going to be our initial state. And then after the angle brackets, I put in, initially it's going to be empty. We're not going to have anything in there. And then we're going to go get it from our, we're going to go get it from our database eventually. But initially it's going to be blank. And so again, let's walk through this statement. We're setting up this object that we're going to use that's going to be retained across the state for this particular component, right? And we have so we have the state object, and we have the state setter, the ability to set this to something. And then we say we're going to set up the initial state, which is a Marriott food array. So an array of Marriott food objects, and initially those are going to be blank. So we just put in the blank array there. That's what that says. And by the way, if this is not making sense to you, grab this line and plug it into one of the generative AIs and say, what does this line do? And then ask it questions and have it explain it to you, right? Okay, so once we have this set up though, then we can go into our table body and we can start to map out this data. So I'm going to take this and delete it. So I'm just back into the middle of the table body. But just like we've done before, I'm going to say, go grab that food data and map it. And then what I'm going to do is set our initial, this is like the beginning of the for loop, right? The initial, the variable that's going to keep track of which one we're on. And then I say lambda, opening parenthesis. And then inside this, I can say for each one, what I want you to do is create a table row. And then the ID for that row, just like we did the hidden value, the hidden input field, but the ID for that row is going to be, let's go set the key equal to whatever the F is we're on, dot food ID. Okay, we close that, and that's the row. That's going to keep track of the row, which row we're on. And then we can go put in the individual columns. So I can go in and say F dot event name. Okay, and then we'll get the F dot vendor name, and then after that we'll get the TD, and then F dot the food rating. What did we call it? What's the name of the third thing? Food name. Food name. That's not right. Food rating. What? Food rating. That's what it was, right? Did I mess it up in the other? We don't have time to be looking at this. Yeah, food rating. All right, food rating. Save that. Control S. Then I'm going to come back to the food list, and I should have here my F dot food rating. Food rating. All right, there we go. All right, save that. It doesn't like vendor name. What did I? Oh, I forgot my closing brace there, and closing brace here as well. All right. So now we've got these things reflecting what was in that Marriott Food TS file, which is like our model. Okay, so in here I'm essentially binding it the same way. This is kind of like my app model, and then these are my entries using that mapping function to go get those elements. But if we run this, it's not going to work yet, so we're going to figure out how to do that next. Spencer out.